Well, today we're gonna draw a raven. It's a bird, and I kind of want to show you this because this is the long form, and this is the format where a lot of people they really want to see some of the details of drawing. Now, most of the YouTube shorts and the social media posts I do are little 60-second clips just to kind of show you in advance of what these are. But I'll show you how I go about drawing because I'll sketch a couple of things first because like today I'm going to draw a raven, and I know a raven kind of has a different look to him. Some birds sort of carry the same characteristics, but a raven has a unique part, which is the beak. And the beak is much longer than the rest of the bird. So I always try to sketch out a couple of things to see where I'm going to, place the bird, kind of get a feel for what it is. Because like on a bird, you see there's a lot of wings, but the wings are not one solid thing. They're a series of feathers. So I try to work where the feathers are going to be. And if you kind of study the feathers, you'll see that they shorten up here at the shoulder, and then as they go down, they get longer, and you can kind of piece these in. Now, there's no science. I'm sure there is, but to a drawing, all you have to do is get the idea, the feeling that you're drawing a bird. And if you kind of look at a raven, and you can do reference too. Oftentimes, I'll use like a Google search for a certain characteristic or a certain item. And this time of year, everybody likes kind of a creepy bird. So a raven is a good one to sort of look at as, I don't know, because Edgar Allan Poe, I guess, he sort of made the raven pretty famous. And, well, I try to keep the feeling of what that bird is, and think in dimensions, because every time you're drawing something, if you notice, I'm just scribbling, and then my pencil sort of finds its way to where it's going to go next just by me looking at it. I say, okay, if I draw way out here, there's going to be nothing out there, so there's no reason for my pencil to go out there. But if it stays here, then once you get the characteristics of that, you sort of start sketching in what it might have as far as its size relationship to things, its shading, where it's going to have a little bit more feathers. You'll see the ravens are very, very, I guess you'd call them disheveled, but they have a long beak, with a nose that comes down on it. And if you ever saw one up close, it's really weird because it does sort of resemble that of like a seagull, sort of. But don't say that to a raven. They'll be so angry at you. But their head is a little bit reduced, and their eyes are really low and set back. And so as you start to sketch the ideas of what you want to see with a raven, you can sort of get the characteristics down, start to build it, and then after you've done a couple of doodles of the scratchings and such, maybe you want to kind of get an idea of what it might look like if it were spreading its wings and getting ready to attack something, or maybe just to look a little bit more vicious, or I don't know, maybe majestic. Majestic might be a good word, because they are a very influential bird, you might say. So I try to kind of get a good sketch thing of what I might work on. And then once I get those feelings down, I can kind of build where I'm going to go with it, because I know what I want to draw, and the rest of it is really going to be how it's going to fit into where I'm drawing it. And so I kind of get some thumbnail sketches. You might want to do a head and see where's that beak come down. And once you get the idea of where the beak is, then you can kind of start pointing everything else into the right direction. But it's a little different than many other birds. But to get it to look like a raven, you just, draw it during Halloween time. And that in itself is one of the ways to show how the raven would be a good bird. So what we're going to do is I like to try to start with the shape, okay? So if you think of a bird, it does have shoulders. It does have somewhat of a shoulder feel. And, you can draw a bird straight from the back, and it's going to look like a teardrop. See, if you just go like this, it's just going to look like a teardrop, because all of its feathers do come back here and touch, and then it has a head up here. Now, if you look at that, that's interesting. That's a bird from the back. So if you think about that and you rotate him just a little bit, just turn that angle just enough so that you can kind of get a little bit of dimension. And let's say this is the middle of his back going up. So the middle of his back is going to separate where the feathers are. And the feathers aren't stuck on their back. They're literally their arms. So if you think of what we have as arms, we have shoulders. And so that's what these are. And The good thing about a raven is it's kind of rugged, if you will. It's got messy feathers going off. It just looks messy, so you can kind of be rough on the outside. But the idea behind drawing a raven is to get that mode, that feeling, that kind of, okay, this is a little bit more of a vicious bird, or he's just going to kind of concern me when I see him coming at me. They do have what's called the tail feathers, and those tail feathers are literally just kind of something. Again, I'm just sort of sketching these in. I'm not drawing feathers per se, like some people might take the time to draw feathers. I draw the shapes first, and this is where I think that I might say that it helps you not to get discouraged if you just sort of draw shapes and then figure out where everything goes. Like I'm kind of looking here and I'm thinking, okay, he should have a leg about here, and a leg doesn't just come out of the body. There's a beefy thigh that comes out of the leg. So add that thigh and then think about where that leg's going to be. And if it's coming down, it probably, the tail feathers are going to drop much further than the foot. So we're going to sort of just get this thing going here, and I want to put a back claw in here. And if you see, I'm just roughing these in because I really don't have a complete idea of where all this is going to be. But I do know that he's got 2 feet, so I'm going to put 2 feet in here. And typically they have 3 claws on those feet, and those 3 claws will sort of grasp around. Let's say it's a branch here, and that branch may continue. And this is another thing. Something here, let's say this is the tail feathers. This branch will actually separate the tail feathers, and it helps to have this dimension. And I'll show you that here in a little bit with shading. But as we get up here, now here's where you kind of get a little bit, you got to make sure that you're kind of heading in the right direction here and elongate the head. It's not just a circle head and a beak sticking out. That is not what a bird's head is. A bird has, it's got a cranium, it's got a skull, it's got a forehead, it's got everything you would think about, but it just happens to have that big beak sticking out. So if we were to put that beak over here and we were to have a little bit of a curve to it, it almost exaggerated. We can come back and change this later, but the beak comes almost straight out and then curves down. Now, as you can see, I've already got the feeling of a bird going here. Now it's just a question of making this bird truly be a raven. And that's going to come with the dark shading, and it's going to come with some of the styles that we put into here. Again, think of what a bird has, and you're going to see that it's kind of got a feeling of, I'm just going to say that anger. So let's give his eye a little bit of anger here. And maybe some fluff in its beak there. Their beaks are not just one solid beak with a line down the middle. Their beaks oftentimes are longer and taller, see on the top piece, and then the bottom piece goes up underneath it. So think of it that way when you're sketching in the beak. Now, if you can see the expression, we already have a pretty angry expression going here. The eyes is a whole different element, but when you put a highlight in the eye, you're not really drawing the highlight. You're drawing everything around the highlight. I only mark it just so I can see where I'm going to be. And that one little dot, that one little light helps to give that eye some life. And you come around that eye, and you'll see that many of the feathers follow the eye path. And you may want to, add a few different darkness pieces here. And if you see how I'm kind of ruffling up those feathers, that helps to feel that we've got our rugged raven being built here. And as I preach this in everything that I draw, whatever's furthest away from you, you will want to darken it as much as possible. Unless, of course, you're on a black background, then you work on the black background. But I like to try to make sure that things that are furthest away from me sort of have a shadow to them. So I want to make sure that they, unless there's a highlight coming, they have that feeling of depth over there. So, and here's a great point too. As I was drawing this, I find that I want to get this a little bit wider up here because it just wasn't feeling wide enough for me to come into the bird's overall mode. Now I'm going to put some shapes of feathers on his back just to kind of define where his back is, and I'm going to let this kind of come around so he's sort of turning a corner here and looking at us, because you don't want to have just his head turned sideways on there. It might kind of look weird. And I'm dropping behind some of these on purpose because the shadow itself is what is key. And if you can kind of get the feeling of these feathers, you're going to have a much better possibility of showing that this bird is turning and looking at you. So you kind of get some of these things coming down like this. Get a couple things wrapping around the shoulder here. And he's going to have a lot of this feather movement coming from behind him here. And we'll let this kind of, and again, I'm leaving some white between where I'm marking in this feather here and putting his eye around, because if you notice, it just gives that eye a lot of flair. And so we're starting to get the feeling that this thing is, he's a little messed, but he's probably not parakeet friendly. So you're looking at a bird that's maybe got an attitude here. Here we go. We're going to put his leg in here, and it's darker than the rest of him, possibly silhouetted on some kind of sky scene behind him. And then the legs have a detail to them, which kind of gives a little bit of almost a scale feel to it. But you want to make sure you have that feeling. And again, we're underneath here, so we're going to make it dark. And then even on the leg, it gets a little shading from that thigh right above it. And it sort of gives it that depth. We go down into his claw, and his back claw is probably reaching around this thing. So we want to make sure that it's reaching this. And there's the actual claw on that. And we'll go ahead and give him a little bit of texture there too. And I know this sounds like Bob Ross, but it's the only way that I can describe what I'm doing is actually talk through it. But if you were to think of each element as different depths, then you would be able to pretty much so fill all voids of space. And see what you can do here. And we're going to go ahead and give him shadowed back foot, because that one's way back there in the background. And this log stick that he's standing on, this is what I was telling you about earlier. This is why it's important. If you notice, it's coming over the back tail feathers. This log isn't just a stick. You got to give it some texture too. So thinking of it as wood and it has grain to it, you literally put the grain in, and if you notice, it starts to set off that tail. But not just that. Here's where the bottom of it is darker than the top. The light's shining on the top of it. So watch it become a stick as I do this. I'm actually adding the shadow to the bottom of the stick and leaving the top just a little light. And then you can kind of come back through and hit that bottom just a little harder. And if you notice, now it's got a feeling, it's called chiaroscuro, when the light is in different places on it. So the light's coming down on top of this stick. But we'll put this in here. Let's go ahead and get his wings in here now. And this is where we can kind of start separating the wings from everything else. Keep saying wings, now I'm getting hungry. And the wings, they may have some feather texture to them. So you may want to add a little bit of texture to them. And the interesting thing about a bird, looking closely at a bird, the feathers are amazing. They really are. And I'm not just saying that, but they're amazing because they have a direction. And all the feathers on one side of their body or in one direction go a given direction. And these are important to follow, because if not, you just have a bunch of feathers going in different directions. Another cool thing is, if you think of the shoulder of this bird, the feathers keep getting longer and longer as they go back. and then bigger and bigger. So a bird may have what looks like a few feathers, but there's literally hundreds of feathers. As you can see, I'm just kind of piecing these in here, and I'm just sketching these. I'm not saying this is exactly how they all should go. I'm just saying that think of the different feathers and make them sort of stretch and get longer, because that's what the flight of the bird does. It actually allows it to spread these wings, and each one gets a little further than the one before it, and they kind of meet right here in the middle. And so if you got a line there, sure, it's okay to finish over it and bring another one in here. And remember, you get these wings, feathers, just keep getting longer and longer. So you've got them coming clear down here, and this is actually a feather. And little by little, you start to notice that now begins to look like a wing. That really does feel like what the wing should be if it were a bird's flight mechanism. And then these other ones come up on top here. And we're going to kind of take his jaw down here because he's coming in from the side. Same thing happens over here with all of his feathers. He's got a whole series of feathers. And, you know, you can mimic from one side to the other what the feathers are doing. But the truth is they are pretty much so in their own path. But we want to get some depth between the wings here. So kind of show what would be the body of the bird beneath the wings to give a little bit of darkness. And again, the darkness recedes. So you can see that's where it goes. Now, on each one of these feathers, this is kind of the cool thing. You're not really drawing the feather. You're drawing the shadow under the feather. And if you watch, I'm actually coming under with the next feather up and letting it draw the shadow. I'm not drawing the feather. The feather is already there. See, that's the feather. I'm drawing the shadow beneath it. And that lets these feathers start to stand out on each other. And then you can come back and edge those a little bit more. But the idea is get in there, get those shadows where that feather would be tucked back in, not where it's shining up. You want the shadow underneath it. And I'll show you here in a second too. Once you get the depth of these feathers figured out, which really just look at it as images. They're just little pieces of material that you want to have one laying on top of the other, so you want to see it. And once we get to that, and again, this is why I like the Raven, because you can really be rough with your pencil lines. And then once you get the assembly of what it looks like, generally speaking, people go, oh, okay, I can see a Raven there. And then it doesn't really matter what you do without doing anything silly and putting anything geometric in there, just keeping everything on a bit of a dark sketch idea. You'll be able to kind of assemble these feathers to the point where someone's going to say, I get it. That's what that is. And I'm just going to kind of get a little bit of this sketching going, pushing here. Get some of the wing feathers over here, which you wouldn't see as many because just a little bit of a turn. And this helps too, is I'm kind of adding a little bit of darkness over here because the bird is turned away from us. And if he's turned away from us, you're going to see more of this feather here. And as you look at those feathers, there's probably a more defined image here. And these feathers, I'm going to continue the shadow with these lines. Do you notice how it brings that feather back into those other feathers? Well, you keep doing that all the way up through. And this technique just gives depth to anything. Whether you're drawing a brick wall or feathers or whatever it may be, this is the way to kind of get that feeling. If you look at it now, you're starting to see, wait a second, those do look like they're back inside there, the feathers, one's behind the other. Because the lightness projects out to you, the back of it, it feels a little darker. And think of it this way, as light hits something, it can't get to the other areas. So it is obviously darker than what the other areas are. The idea behind it now is to try to keep that feeling that it's not, you know, a solid object. It's got to be organic. It's got to be something that feels like there's a drifting shadow, not an absolute shadow. It's got to feel the texture of whatever you're working on. And as the more I do of this, the more you start to see that it is actually a black bird. And I'm drawing with just a pencil. And we're going to go ahead and fill in the beak here. I'm drawing with just a pencil. So what I have is really a, I'm using an HB pencil, but if you look real close there, that's an HB, which means it's got a different type of lead to it, which is a little lighter than the other leads. And that helps because if I use a whole B pencil, I could draw really, really dark black lines. And sometimes that's what you want, but for the most part, you just want to make sure that you get the feeling of black, and that happens a lot with the shading. And there are people that will go, oh, that's not anatomically correct, that's not a raven. But you know what? Look at it. Does it look like a raven? That's what matters. If you got something that's actually close to it, then it is all you need to do. And don't forget your friend the eraser too. If you really wanted to get back in here and do some stuff with, you know, you want to take a little bit of the darkness away in some spots, you can. Like, for instance, the top of this stick, you may want to get back in here and add a little bit more. Now, here is the overall secret to the sketching. If you have a point of direction to the drawing, you've got something going. If you don't have a point of direction, find one. Like, for instance, this stick is pretty dark, so it's drawing your attention to it. So let's come back in here and make this eye be a point of direction. You're going to start to look at this eye and go, okay, there's where I'm supposed to be looking. So we're going to bring this to a little bit more depth. And now the attention starts to hit right there in the eye. And so now your attention goes to this eye, and it's balanced with everything else that's going on. There are so many things you can do. You can actually go in and start to add the texture to the wings too. And the texture to the wings could be a part that really adds to that final feeling of what you're drawing. Because I'm going to do this real quick, and then we'll be done with this lesson. But as you see, every pencil stroke you make, whether it's pen or pencil, adds to the feeling that it is something that's a little bit closer to realism than just a little sketch drawing. Nothing wrong with little sketch drawings. That's the way you kind of get the mode of what you want to do. And again, pick some reference. With the beauty of Google, you can actually say, hey, I want to see a flamingo bird, standing in a snowbank. And there's probably a picture of it someplace on Google. And of course, with AI, you can ask the same thing and it can show you things. Use them as reference and then practice. And like I've said many times, anything you do, do it a bunch of times and you'll get better at it. I can tell you that. I can guarantee you that. So do whatever you're doing with your artwork and continue to do it. And I think you're going to be happy with trying some of these techniques. Last thing I'm doing here before I get to it is I'm going around and giving a little bit of depth to the outside of him. And let's put some little bit of rough feathers over here because he's got a messy feather. And we're adding a little bit of depth in here. And there it is. There it is. That is the, that's a raven. And as you see, I always try to do a couple thumbnail sketches and then I get into what I'm drawing. but the drawing is more about technique than anything else. If you see a raven there, then I've already done what I've done. If you see a pigeon, I'm a little bit off. But the idea behind this is find the sketches, start to draw it, and allow yourself to move as you're drawing. Don't worry about being absolutely correct on the very first step. That's what this is all about. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Subscribe to Ohio Jimbo, and there's quite a few more lessons coming up. We're trying to do a sketch a day in the month of October, so they're all going to be October themed, and they're going to have, if you're wondering, they're going to get progressively more towards like Halloween. By the end of these series, you'll see some Frankensteins and things of that sort. So you'll actually see characters. But for right now, we're going to just kind of show some of these as lessons for technique and style. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching this. And once again, if you can, subscribe to Ohio Jimbo, and hope to see you again.